Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to session 2 of today's PENC virtual Raleigh seminar. We hope that you enjoyed the morning session, and we are so grateful that you are with us today. As always, if you have any technical issues, please use the chat box and I will try to assist you. You can type your questions for the speaker into the questions box and I will read those out loud. Today's speaker is Randall Etheridge. Randall Etheridge, PE, is a registered professional engineer in North Carolina. Randall is currently an assistant professor in the Department of Engineering and the Center for Sustainable Energy and Environmental Engineering at East Carolina University. Prior to joining ECU, he served as an agricultural engineer with the Southwest Florida Water Management District. In addition to leading the environmental engineering concentration at ECU, his work focuses on helping communities in Eastern North Carolina address water quality and quantity issues. He received his PhD and BS in biological and agricultural engineering from North Carolina State University. Randall, thanks so much for being with us today.
Thanks, Katie. Thanks for the invitation to be here, and I appreciate everyone joining us at noon. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and start working through my presentation. If you're in PENC and in Eastern North Carolina, you may be thinking, "Oh, great, we're going to hear the same talk that we've heard before." But I have switched things up a little bit, tried to add some new information, so you're not going to be hearing the same talk that you may have heard at some of the local meetings before. And we've got some new information and made some new progress on the work at Mattamuskeet. So I'm going to go ahead and get started in the presentation. Go ahead and get some of the more boring stuff out of the way first. Got to acknowledge all the folks that have been a part of this, and I can't list all the names. Some other faculty at ECU, Linda Deanna, Cindy Grace McCaskey, Ariane Peralta, and Raymond Smith, and also grad students Brian Hinckley and Tom Vogel, and the current engineering capstone students. I'll talk more about them later on. Had quite a few partners in this, specifically Hyde County, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission. And then you can see the funding, where the funding has come from to do this work there at the bottom. So just an outline of what I'm going to cover today. I am going to talk a little bit about sea level rise, just real quickly introduce you to it in case you're not familiar with the potential or the big issues that it's causing in places in Eastern North Carolina. Talk a little bit about the current status of Lake Mattamuskeet and what really started this effort. And then we're going to actually talk a little bit about some of the solutions that are being considered. And then at the end, get a little bit into some water quality research. And you'll see how the water quality research ties in once I get into the current status of the lake. So, sea level rise. All I'm going to talk about from sea level rise, I'm not going to get into what's causing it or any of the politics that surround when you start talking about sea level rise and climate change. I'm just going to talk about what the data is showing. And this is from Oregon Inlet Marina. You can see they started collecting data, some in the 1970s, but really started collecting data in the mid-1990s. And over that period, they're showing approximately 5 millimeters per year. As engineers, you're used to probably working in feet, so we're going to try to use that as much as possible. So about 1 2/3 feet over the next 100 years is how much they expect sea level to rise based on the projections from Oregon Inlet Marina. Oregon Inlet doesn't have the longest record, the most complete record. So I did go and pull the record from DUC, the Army Corps of Engineers pier that is there. That's pretty, those are the two closest monitoring stations to Lake Mattamuskeet. The DUC monitoring goes back to the 1970s, and you can see it's showing almost 5 millimeters per year, or approximately 1.5 feet in 100 years. So I'm going to kind of use that as what I'm going to work through when looking at this presentation. Approximately 1.5 feet of water level rise over the next 100 years. So if you're from, the western part of the state or even the central part of North Carolina, you may be thinking, okay, 1.5 feet over the next 100 years, what's the big deal? Even in Greenville, people would say that. So Greenville elevation here outside of the river is going to range between 30 and 60 feet above sea level. So even in Greenville, most folks are going to be thinking, okay, what's the big deal? Why are we going to be worried about sea level rise when we're talking, you know, 1.5 feet over the next 100 years? But let's take a look a little bit further east of Greenville. This map here is a lot of northeastern North Carolina, and let's look specifically at this dark red or maroon color. We've got areas in that color are below 1.6 feet in elevation. So these are places that are going to be inundated over the next 100 years. The reddish color there are places that are less than 3.3 feet in elevation. So those are places, you know, if the trend continues, we're going to lose in 200 years. But big thing I want to point out here is there's a lot of land in eastern North Carolina that has the potential to be inundated with just a 1.5 foot rise in sea level. Talking with some of the farmers in this area of eastern North Carolina, they would say 1980s, having a pump to increase your drainage rate was a luxury. Now having a pump is a necessity for agricultural production. So they're already feeling the effects of this sea level rise and seeing how it affects their daily life. So that's a real brief introduction to sea level rise. Just wanted to get us all on the same page. We're going to be talking about, again, 1.5 feet over the next 100 years. So now, looking at the current status of Lake Mattamuskeet. So for those of you not familiar, Lake Mattamuskeet, shown here in the green circle, is, or the green oval, is right in the middle of this area that's going to be affected quite a bit by sea level rise. And I'm going to take a break real quick to drink some water. Sorry about that. So you can see Lake Mattamuskeet's right in the middle of kind of this hot spot that's going to be affected by sea level rise. So it's a great example of what the communities in this area are going to face as waters continue to rise. Now this is a engineering presentation, so I have to mention one of what I consider an amazing feat of engineering. Back in the 19-teens and 1920s, Lake Mattamuskeet was actually drained, completely drained for agricultural production. At the time, the biggest pumping plant in the world was installed at Lake Mattamuskeet. There were 8 60-inch pumps installed there, and they could pump a total of 1.2 million gallons per minute. I'm not going to get into the details of why this effort failed, but just wanted to show you that, you know, pumping water out of Lake Mattamuskeet or reducing flooding there is not something that's new. It's been done before, and it can be done again. If they could do it with technology 100 years ago, we should be able to do it now. This also just shows the level of alteration, drainage alteration that has occurred there. So to talk a little bit more about the current status of the lake. The lake itself is approximately 40,000 acres. That's the area that it covers. The watershed that drains to the lake is approximately 68,000 acres. The land cover in the watershed is made up of wetlands. There's a little bit of commercial and developed area, but a lot of the other areas, agriculture and waterfowl impoundments. Right now, there are 4 canals that lead from the lake to the Pamlico Sound. This long straight canal that's shown right here is Outfall Canal. That is the one where the pumping station was located. Lake Landing Canal, which is shown here in this darker blue, was actually dug by hand in the 1800s, excuse me. So there's really a long history of drainage alteration here. We have these 4 canals, and any water that leaves the lake must flow through one of these 4 canals. So on each of these canals, there are tide gates, and flow only occurs when the water level in the sound is lower than the water level in the lake. So anytime the Pamlico Sound water level is above that in the lake, there's no flow out. And that's important to know when we start to think about sea level rise. As sea level rise occurs, water level in the sound is going to be higher and higher, which means there's going to be fewer and fewer times that these tide gates are going to be able to open. And you'll see later on how this is driving some of the design and some of the solutions that are being considered for the lake. So what really spurred this effort on was Hurricane Matthew. Talking about flooding just in Hyde County as a whole, which is where Lake Mattamuskeet is located, there were areas in Hyde County where resident septic systems were underwater for over 2 weeks following Hurricane Matthew. You can see this picture here that I think there's 7 tractors with portable pumps hooked up to them that are pumping out. And what you don't see in this picture are the permanent pumps that are located just to the left of where this picture was taken that are also running wide open. They had, in the county as a whole, 75% of the cotton was lost, 50% of the soybean crop was lost due to Hurricane Matthew. And Hyde County is very much an agricultural area where agriculture is a large part of the economy. So reducing flooding so the farmers can grow their crops is important to them. Again, keep in mind, the lake was drained so that it could be farmed. This is very fertile farmland, so it's very important for the economy there. Now, let's look at what happened during Lake Mattamuskeet, in Lake Mattamuskeet during Hurricane Matthew. On the left axis here, we've got the elevation in feet. Early September 2016, the water level was approximately 1 feet above mean sea level. Then during Hurricane Matthew, which occurred in early October, the water level got up above 1.5 feet. So the water level only rose from the beginning of September due to a storm here. Due to a storm here, approximately up to 1 feet, and then Hurricane Matthew went up above 1.5 feet. So some people, this may seem like minor changes in water elevation, but I'm going to get ready and walk through and show you how big of a change this was for Hyde County and Lake Mattamuskeet. Just an example of what some of the farmers faced around the watershed. This is an area that I was working. The farmer's got his portable pump set up. He's got right behind his portable pump, you can see the lake water level. The area I'm standing, the berm I'm standing on, he's pumping water out to the lake, and water's flowing right back in over his berm. You can see that here on the picture on the right as well. To the right is where the lake is, and the water's flowing right back into his farm field as he's pumping it out. So these minor changes in water level do play a big role in the areas that get flooded. Now I'm going to do a little bit better job of illustrating this for you. This is just a bathtub model, and we're going to keep pouring water in to the lake to raise the water level and show you what floods. So this is the water when the water level is at approximately 0.3 of a foot below mean sea level. Now I'm going to go ahead and raise it up quite a bit. Raise it up to 1.1 feet, and you can see residential area on the north side of the lake, residential area on the south side of the lake are already being impacted by the water. Now I'm going to raise it another 0.4 of a foot up to 1.5 feet. What we looked at as being just below the water level that occurred during Hurricane Matthew. And this gives you an idea of all the area that can flood when the water level gets that high. Now, all of this area isn't connected to the lake. But it does give you an idea of how low some of this land is and the potential of having a small increase in water level really impacting the amount of area that's flooded or has the potential to flood. The next thing that spurred this on, we obviously had the flooding during Hurricane Matthew, is the question, where is the grass? The grass that they're referring to is submerged aquatic vegetation in the lake. Let's look at the map that's in the upper right. This is a map of the lake. Green indicates locations where submerged aquatic vegetation was found. This map is from 1991. You can see the only place that submerged aquatic vegetation was not found was this area that's right here in blue. That's the deepest part of the lake. So it's not very surprising that submerged aquatic vegetation was not found there. 2015, you can see most of the lake is blue. That means most of the submerged aquatic vegetation has disappeared. If we were to go back and look at this map for 2017, 2018, the whole lake would be blue. There was no submerged aquatic vegetation found in the lake during these years. This has been linked to decreases in water quality. It also has the potential to be influenced by higher water levels that are related to the flooding that we just talked about. So I know that you can't see the details on this slide. It's not my intention for you to be able to see the details on this slide too much, because I don't want to focus on the details. What I want to focus on are the fact that these are water quality parameters, and the recommended parameters for lakes are shown in gray. And as you can see, most of the water quality parameters are outside the recommended parameters. So again, that link to submerged aquatic vegetation, disappearance, and water quality, this is what it's being blamed on quite a bit, is just these changes in water quality make it where there's algal blooms, and then because of the algal blooms, it shades out the light, so the light can't reach the bottom where the submerged aquatic vegetation is. So that's kind of the thought process between the water quality there. I'll get back to that a little bit later on. So all of this kind of led to this watershed restoration planning process. This is a community-driven process. It was started in 2017. The plan was approved in August of 2019. And the current status is that the partners have received funding to design and implement solutions. And I'm going to talk a little bit more specifically about ECU's role in that. So if you were to go pull up this plan, see the approved plan, this is really what you would see as far as proposed solutions. And as you can see, there's not a lot of details on it. What we're looking at here to the north of the lake is the intercoastal waterway. And you can notice we're not talking about moving, at least the proposed solutions do not show moving water to the south at all, or to the Pamlico Sound. Reason being is talking about potentially moving fresh water from the lake out to the Pamlico Sound. There's a concern of potential ecological impacts from the additional fresh water being moved there. Also, there's the potential of adding bacteria, additional bacteria to the Pamlico Sound, which is an important shellfishing area. And we don't want to add that additional bacteria to this shellfishing area and potentially make those shellfish unsafe to eat. So the idea is to move all that water to the north, to the intercoastal waterway. If you're familiar with this area, they're having a lot of issues with saltwater intrusion along the intercoastal waterway. So the thought is, let's move additional fresh water there, and hopefully that will help address that problem too. So Water quality, as I've mentioned earlier, is also a concern. That's why you see these large areas that are shaded here. These are areas that are proposed sheet flow sites where they want to treat the water that's coming from the lake before it is released to the intercoastal waterway. Now, I'm going to get into first talking about some of the potential flooding solutions and the role that ECU has played in that, some of the efforts we have going on at the moment, and then talk about actually evaluating some of those solutions. So currently, we have 3 teams of senior engineering students that are developing concept plans for 3 different focus areas, and I'll walk through those focus areas in a minute. Goals for this is we were hoping this would be a community-driven design process. That has definitely been a challenge due to COVID-19, where the students haven't been on campus, and we haven't been able to go out and meet with the community as much as we would like to. In the end, what we want the students to do is to produce concept plans that both provide cost estimates and a model of solution effectiveness. Then we're going to take these back to the community, and the community is going to be able to decide which one do we want to carry forward and start looking for grant funds to implement. So which one do we want to hire a consulting firm to move forward with and develop the design further, and then pursue grant funds to actually get it implemented. So I'm going to walk through kind of the 3 focus areas. The first is the landowner project. This is the only project that was actually mentioned in the restoration plan, and you can see it here shown on the end of the orange arrow. So this landowner project, I'm going to start with the map on the right. The gold outline here, or orange outline, is this landowner's property boundary. It's approximately 1,200 acres. The area outlined in red is the potential wetland sheet flow area, and that's about 270 acres. The idea is to have land that was formerly draining to the lake. Now this farmer is going to pump it through a wetland area and then out to the intercoastal waterway. If these wetlands have additional capacity, then there will be a structure located at the boundary to the lake where water can flow from the lake into this property, where then it can go through the sheet flow area and be treated. Now, 270 acres on a 40 compared to a 40,000 acre lake, this project's not going to have a substantial impact at the watershed scale. This project was pursued because we're hoping it can kind of serve as a model for other similar projects in the watershed. It's one of those things where if you have enough of these small projects, they can make a large impact. But one project on its own is not going to have a major impact there. So that's really the last you're going to hear me talk about that during this presentation. The Mattamuskeet Association project, I've gone back to this slide just to show you the area that I'm talking about. And the Mattamuskeet Association is shown on the northeast side, outlined in yellow here. I'm going to zoom in and give you a little bit different view of the Mattamuskeet Association. The Mattamuskeet Association, the boundary of it shown there in yellow is 42,000 acres. And the association is an area where they already manage the water using pumps to make agricultural production possible. And they maintain the water level within the Mattamuskeet Association at approximately 3 feet below sea level already. So if you're thinking, we started looking at the land around the lake and thinking, if we're going to have to treat this volume of water or treat a large volume of water coming out of Lake Mattamuskeet, Mattamuskeet Association already has the infrastructure set up in quite a few places to move the water. And these areas that are shown in red, specifically on the western side of the association, are areas that are already being constructed to treat drainage water. So these are areas that are available. This area here on the eastern side has already been set up to or is being set up to treat agricultural drainage water, but it's not available for any additional water or adding additional area. These areas on the west side are available, so that's why this was brought up. I'll show you in a little bit more detail kind of what the idea is for this. The idea is to, again, have some type of structure at the boundary between the lake and the Mattamuskeet Association. There is an existing canal that's currently dammed up that could be opened up, and a gravity flow structure added at that boundary. Then it would flow just into the drainage infrastructure that already exists in the Mattamuskeet Association, and pumps would be added at both of these locations to move water into this area. Now, some of you are probably looking at this thinking, okay, we're talking a 40,000 acre lake. The areas that he's showing us here are maybe 3,000 acres. That's still not going to be enough to drain all of this water through and actually treat it. And that's one of the challenges with this is all of this area, there's no way that we're going to be able, that's one of the things we're finding is there's no way we're going to be able to treat all of this water or pump it through a wetland before it gets discharged somewhere. So that's one of the challenges that we're still trying to work through and figuring out exactly how much of that water are we going to be able to send through wetlands, and what areas are available to potentially be converted to wetlands for that treatment. Now, everything that I'm going to kind of discuss later on is applicable to the Mattamuskeet Association project, because we're going to be looking at volumes of water. How much water are we actually going to have to move to solve these flooding issues? Primarily what I'm going to focus on the rest of the way through is going to be the canals project. I introduced the 4 canals earlier, and one of the things that we heard over and over from the community was that what we really need to do is just dredge these canals. These canals haven't been dredged in 30 years. If we dredge the canals, it's going to solve all of our problems. We heard this over and over, so we wanted to investigate it, see if that was the case. So to investigate all this, I worked with Raymond Smith, who has expertise in modeling, to develop a water budget-based model for Lake Mattamuskeet. This is a very simplified representation of the model. We took into account precipitation falling on surrounding land, falling on the lake. We took into account evaporation, the movement of water from the surrounding watershed into the lake, actually transferring water out of the lake for different land uses, such as waterfowl impoundments. And then we modeled the flow of water from the lake out to the Pamlico Sound based on the functioning of the tide gate. Now, like I said, this is a simplistic representation. There was quite a bit of additional modeling done in programs like HECRAS to get the inputs for this model and get some of the equations that are governing. So I'll start showing results a little bit later on. This is the model that we're using to evaluate what the effectiveness of some of these solutions are. So, canals project, we're just going to look at a couple of alternatives and see how effective they are based on using that model. The things that have been proposed are dredging the canals to their original dimensions. That makes sense from a permitting perspective and kind of an ease of getting it done. You don't have to think about taking up anyone's additional land. Not saying that the permitting is going to be easy by any means, but it would be much simpler than, or it would be simpler than some of the other alternatives that I've heard proposed. Widening the canals is something that's been proposed, mainly because of the movement of sediment. A wider and shallower canal should need dredging less often because the velocity should be a little bit higher and the sediment should be moving. The other thing that has been suggested, this is not necessarily good from the environmental standpoint, but it's something that we're going to look at just from more of an exercise of how much water do we need to move out, is just adding pumps at the tide gates. What if we just pump the water out of there? Can we solve the issue? So we're going to look through specifically changing the dimensions of the canals from where they are currently, and then just adding pumps at the tide gates, and learning the effect that pumps might have would also inform how much water we would need to move through the Mattamuskeet Association to potentially for that project. So it's all interconnected. All right, so I'm going to be showing you quite a few graphs that look like this. On the x-axis here, we've got time. This modeling period starts in October 2015. It runs through mid-December 2017. Right in the middle here, we have Hurricane Matthew. On the y-axis, we have water level in feet. And what's shown in blue is what we actually observed in the lake. That's what happened over this time period in the lake. Anything that is not in blue indicates what happened in the model, what happened when we simulated a scenario. So going back to what the stakeholders said, the community members told us, if we dredge the lake, it's going to solve all our problems. Well, we simulated the dredging, and over this time period, if you start to look at it, it looks like the stakeholders were pretty close to being right. You see this one spike in water level here, that's Hurricane Matthew. What happened there was, and what caused this big peak, one of the things that caused this big peak, and what caused the peak, simulated peak here, is that the Pamlico Sound was higher than this 1.5 feet for 5 out of the 6 days following Hurricane Matthew. So water just couldn't leave. Even if the canals were dredged, those tide gates weren't open. So it didn't matter what the dimensions of the canals were, they weren't effective. So keep in mind, this is current scenarios. So if the canals had been dredged, we might have been okay during Hurricane Matthew. Water levels definitely should not have gotten as high as they did. Now, here's the conflict. Here's where sea level rise comes in. What happens when we have a foot of sea level rise? That's shown here on the gray line. If we dredge the canals and have a foot of sea level rise, we're going to be in worse shape than we are now typically, and the water level could have reached approximately 2 feet in elevation during Hurricane Matthew, and you see that point there. That again shows the water level would actually be higher in the sound than it would have been in the lake during that period. And really, that indicates that a lot of the peninsula there, a lot of the areas surrounding the lake would have been inundated. You can also see other areas throughout this time period where the water level would have been higher. So dredging the canals would help short term. Long term, it's not going to be a viable solution. Add in 1.5 feet of sea level, what we're expecting over the next 100 years, and you can just see the lake's going to be in much worse shape. We even reach a peak of 2.5 feet potentially during an event like Hurricane Matthew. You can see that dredging the canals alone is not going to be a long-term solution. And that's why pumps are being considered. So one of the things we had to do, I'm sure those of you that work in this area know all about the assumptions you have to make. We're at the very early process of evaluating pumps and trying to work with the stakeholders to understand how the pumps can be managed has definitely been a challenge. One of the things that you think about it when you start talking about moving water out of a lake like this, we can prevent a lot of flooding if we're allowed to draw the lake levels down low prior to a hurricane. The challenge comes in when you start thinking about uncertainty in weather forecasts. What happens if we know 5 days out or see 5 days out, we're going to get 8 inches of rain? We draw that water level down, and then the hurricane doesn't come. The hurricane turns and it misses us. well, then that has the potential to really impact the ecology of the lake, the fish, the plants that grow on the outside of the lake, the plants that grow in the lake, hopefully grow in the lake again. And then that has the potential to affect the waterfowl and other important species there. So there's a lot that we've still got to figure out as far as actually how these pumps are going to be managed. But this is kind of the first cut. Here's the idea that's been given to us by some of the stakeholders, is really just having it managed by a float switch. And that's pretty easy to set up in a model. So during the growing season, we're going to have the pumps cut on anytime the water level gets above a half a foot. During the winter, the pumps are going to cut on when the water level is above 0.75 feet. And those are some levels that have been recommended by some of the biologists that work in the area. So, and the capacity of pumps that I'm getting ready to show is just the total pump capacity, either on all the canals or on the lake itself. I'm not getting into too many details about pump placement or anything like that now. We're just looking at total volume of water that has to be moved. So again, we've got our blue line, which is what happened. Then I'm adding two different pump capacities, pumps of 200,000 gallons per minute and pumps of 600,000 gallons per minute. 600,000 gallons per minute was chosen because this was the volume of pump that actually got the water level, kept the water level below 1 foot during Hurricane Matthew. So we didn't see that widespread flooding on some of the maps that I showed you earlier. 200,000 gallons per minute is just more of a median, just to see what could be done with a lower volume of pump. And you can see both of these pumps are going to prevent the major flooding. You can also see the impact of the float switch specifically here in the early area, where we're managing the water level almost right at that 0.75 feet level right there. So at current conditions, the pumps would definitely be effective. Let's see what happens when we add a foot of sea level rise. Now, again, we're seeing we're not nearly getting to the water levels that we did during Hurricane Matthew, but at this point you can start to see that the water levels just throughout the year years are going to be higher than they typically would be or than they are currently. So this, again, is going to affect the ecology of the lake, and it's something that is going to have to be quite a few conversations had about how to manage these pumps if they are installed there. Now, let's go ahead and go up to the extreme scenario of 1.5 feet. I'm going to go back and I just want you to notice there's not a whole lot of change here. So a 200,000 gallon per minute pumping capacity, we're still not going to get to the water levels we did during Hurricane Matthew, and we're going to be able to prevent that catastrophic flooding. Big change we're going to see here is just the water levels during non-flooding periods. We're going to see that big change, and again, that's a concern from an ecology perspective. How is that going to affect the plants and the wildlife and everything else that call this lake home? Now, we can see that these pump capacities are enough to handle what we need, and that gives us an idea of kind of moving forward, what it's going to take to manage the water from a volume perspective. Now, the next thing I want to show you is the impact of having these pumps and how the costs are going to change through time based on just the volume of water that's going to have to be pumped. So let's start here with our blue line. Again, our x-axis, we're going through time, and what I've got here on the y-axis is the cumulative volume that's pumped out of the lake over this period of time. So in the current scenario, where we just have that float switch set up, no sea level rise at all, over this period of time, we would have pumped out approximately 100,000 acre feet. And you can see when most of the time, the pumps aren't even on. That's what the flat line indicates. The pumps aren't even on. When you have your major pumping is this period, which is Hurricane Matthew, and then other parts of late 2015, early 2016 that were wet. What you see the difference really come in is when you have the sea level rise. Sea level rise just shows the impact, or these lines show the impact the sea level rise is going to have on the volume of water that can be transported out via the current canals. You're going to almost double the amount of water that would be pumped out over the same time period when you start looking at sea level rise. What we're saying here is those tide gates are going to stay closed a whole lot more, and most of that water that's going to have to be moved is going to have to be moved out via pumping. Why is that important? Somebody has got to pay the maintenance on these pumps. Someone's got to pay the fuel bill on these pumps. And then there's talking about the management. So yes, 200,000 gallon per minute. You add that pumping capacity to the lake, we're going to really have a huge impact on the flooding that occurs. But somebody's going to have to be willing to pick up the bill for paying for that fuel, paying for the maintenance, and then paying for someone to manage the pumps. So we're making progress on understanding what's going to be required in this system, but there's a lot of issues that are really outside some of the engineering that are going to have to be worked through for these projects to move forward. Now I'm going to move on and talk a little bit about the water quality research. I'm going to check my time real quick. Don't have a whole lot of time left, so I'm going to kind of breeze through these fairly quickly. Go back to this slide here, and I really want to focus on B. I'm going to kind of circle around B here. B is total nitrogen, and a lot of folks in this area or a lot of folks involved with the process are saying, okay, total nitrogen is the issue. Like I mentioned earlier, they're having the algal blooms that are then potentially shading out the submerged aquatic vegetation. And a lot of folks are saying, okay, just like they are in the rest of the state, it's agriculture. Nitrogen coming off of agricultural lands is causing this big increase. And if we can just get the nitrogen coming from ag lands under control, we'll be okay. So that's what I went in to investigate partially. I also went in to investigate waterfowl impoundments. And I'll explain the importance of waterfowl impoundments in a second. So the questions we trying to answer was how much inorganic nitrogen is exported to the lake. Inorganic nitrogen is ammonium and nitrate, which are the forms that plants really love to take up. And then when does this inorganic nitrogen export occur? And wanted to show you the importance of waterfowl impoundments. Waterfowl impoundments, you can see anything highlighted or outlined in purple is an impoundment owned or managed by the National Wildlife Refuge that is there. Anything shown there in kind of that bluish green color are privately owned impoundments. So waterfowl impoundments are a big portion of the watershed. So there was question, some previous research showed that these waterfowl impoundments could be a big source of nitrogen. So I investigated those and some of the agricultural land. So there's different types of waterfowl impoundments, and really what it comes down to is they manage the water to grow whatever type of food for the waterfowl. The impoundment that's shown there at the top looks just like an agricultural field because it almost is exactly like an agricultural field. Farmers typically grow corn in these agricultural fields, and they actually get paid enough by hunters that on a typical year, an average year, they make more money by leaving the crop in the field to make a profit, to attract waterfowl than they would by harvesting the crop and selling it. So that's what a lot of these farmers do in these waterfowl impoundments. They have the waterfowl, or they grow their crop just like they normally would, except they don't harvest it, so it stays there. The impoundment that's shown here at the bottom is what I call a managed wetland. These are managed by the National Wildlife Refuge that is there. They apply no fertilizer, but they manage the water levels to optimize the growth of specific plants that produce quite a bit of waterfowl food. Now, again, no fertilizer, but all of these have been found to have high nitrogen concentrations coming out during the drawdown period. but no one had really gone in and looked and said how much is coming out. So that's what I went down there to do. Real briefly, just to look at the timing of some of this. The managed wetland is flooded from October to early April, and there's some prescribed drawdowns between April and September. Those pumps are usually managed manually, where somebody actually has to go out and cut the pump on or cut the pump off. The agricultural area is typically flooded from October to mid-February, mid-February being the end of youth waterfowl season. After that, they typically cut the pumps on. These are often managed by a float switch. So when the water level gets to a certain point, the pump kicks on, and then it draws the water down and cuts itself off. So I'm not going to get into too many details about the nitrogen process. I just throw this up here to show you it's complicated, and the water levels in it really impact what processes occur. So I had 2 monitoring sites within the watershed, one managed wetland, one agricultural area. Each of them had the outflow controlled by pumps. The stars are the location of the pumps. And I measured the water quality and the water level at the pumps sub-hourly throughout 2017. And that's what we're going to look at here. So this is on the left y-axis, cumulative nitrogen export. The x-axis, we have 2017. The y-axis on the right, we have water export in centimeters. If you want to work in inches, 60 centimeters is approximately 24 inches. So we had over 24 inches of water exported throughout this year. These lines are flat at the beginning and end of the year because there's no export. The pump is off during that time. What we see, let's look at the black line here is the ammonium export. The green line here is the nitrate export. Again, these are the types of nitrogen the plants love. And what we can see is we get to, I'm going to say early May, which is approximately when this is. We've had not even 100 kilograms of ammonium has been exported, and less than 50 kilograms of nitrate has been exported. But by the time we get to the beginning of June, we've had over 250 kilograms of each of these types of nitrogen being exported. So May, the period from May to the beginning of June is when most of that nitrogen is being exported to the lake. Reason is, in this case, the farmer fertilizes, and then it just so happened in this year, 25% of the rain for the whole year fell in May. So the farmer just saw his investment in fertilizer really just being pumped right out into the lake. You don't see much after that period because the fertilizer has been taken up by the crop, and there's not as much there because it's already gone out to the lake. Key take-home point here is most of that nitrogen loss occurred prior to June 1st, but it did not occur, or most of it occurred during the month of May. We go over to the managed wetland. There was less water export here, which was expected. They don't pull the water down nearly as far in the managed wetland. Big thing I want to point out here, 2 big things actually, almost no nitrate export. What we would expect based on the biogeochemical processes that occur. I'm not going to get into too many details of that just due to time, but most of the ammonium export occurs here from about mid-April to the beginning of May. So think back to the agricultural area. It's pretty much the month of May is when that export occurs. The export from the managed wetland occurs from mid-April until the beginning of May. So from mid-April to the end of May, we've got a lot of nitrogen being pumped out to this lake. Now, I don't have time to get into some of the potential solutions here, so I'm going to keep moving. But all of this made me ask the question, are we missing a piece of the puzzle? And what made me ask this question was some of the results that they just started collecting in 2017 to look at what's going on in the lake during the winter. Most of the time, they actually did not collect samples in the lake during the winter because they didn't want to disturb the waterfowl that were there. But you can see here, November, there's almost no ammonium or nitrate in the lake. But we get to mid-January, we've got what I would consider extremely high ammonium concentrations. They've gone up 1.4 milligrams per liter. Now remember, this is January. Most of our export occurred from the monitoring we did. Most of that occurred after mid-April. The earliest we had any occurring was mid-February. I talked with some of the folks down there and they said, well, there are some impoundment owners that start exporting, start pumping water out in mid-January. Well, maybe that's what's causing it. All right, so I went in, did some calculations. If we drain all of them, I went kind of extreme with the calculations. So let's drain all the private impoundments. And let's estimate an elevated ammonium concentration at 3 milligrams per liter. And we're going to drain all of the water. We're not going to do a slow drawdown. So I kind of considered the most extreme scenario. You do that, it's going to actually raise the ammonium concentration in the lake 0.05 milligrams per liter. So this is one of those scenarios where we've gone down, we've done the research, and we're still missing a piece to the puzzle. Everybody's pointing their finger at agriculture and waterfowl impoundments, and the results that we have so far just aren't showing that they're a big source during this time of year. It looks like we're missing something. So that's what that's the next thing that we're working on. What's this big source of inorganic N to the lake in December and January? Is it just the waterfowl that are there? That's a possibility. Is it septic systems on areas around the lake, or it could be atmospheric deposition? So those are some of the things that we're looking at. Next, what role does the nitrogen plant play in the algal blooms? That's something that we also have to research. We know the algal blooms are occurring, but we haven't completely said that it's nitrogen that is sparking them. Something I haven't even mentioned, that's another big key, is there's a lot of invasive carp in the lake. And the carp love to destroy the submerged aquatic vegetation. So it could be that these nutrients are not even going to, in the end, be the issue. It could be that carp removal is the thing that ends up solving the submerged aquatic vegetation issue in the lake. And I think the Fish and Wildlife Service was recently awarded approximately $1 million grant to go in and remove carp to see if that's effective. So just to summarize everything that I've gone through, I know that I'm getting short on time. The reduction in flooding is going to require substantial investment up front, and there's going to be quite a bit of additional funds that are going to be required for managing the pumps, maintaining the pumps, and then whatever type of fuel is used for the pumps. And that's just going to only change and increase in the future with continued sea level rise. We did find from the nutrient standpoint that managed wetlands and agricultural areas or impoundments are both sources of inorganic into the lake, but we haven't identified that they're a big cause and spike in nitrogen concentrations that occurs in December and January. Any way we look at this, it's going to require innovative solutions that engineers are going to have to play a role in that are going to be sustainable under future conditions. And I think the other big point is we still have a lot of work to do. We do not have all the answers for this system at this point. So I'd like to thank y'all for bearing through this with me. I apologize for the coughing that occurred early on in the presentation. Just appreciate you hanging with me.
All right, we have some questions that have come through. Has the degradation in water quality been conclusively shown to be solely due to water depth in the lake?
So as far as the degradation of water quality, I don't think anyone has figured out exactly what it's been caused by at this point. We do think water depth could be playing a role. The deeper the water, the less light that is going to make it to the bottom for the vegetation to grow. But the short answer is we don't have all the answers yet. So the degradation of water quality has not been linked to increase in water level yet.
Does the model used account for any mitigating or antagonistic effects of a sea level rise on the modeled storm of Matthew? It looks like it was just added as an extra depth only.
You're exactly right. We did not take into account any of the additional effects that may have played a role in Matthew, and I think they would make what the results showed actually quite a bit worse. Maybe the 600,000 gallon per minute pumps may not have been effective. We could have had water actually flow over from the sound into the lake from other areas if we had gotten into model that. But yeah, that's a great point. It does not include any of the other factors. Like you said, it just shows an increase in water level in the sound during those periods. Thank you.
Does the 1.5 feet of sea level rise create a tailwater effect in the canals that might inhibit their capacity to receive pumped water?
Absolutely, it does. I mean, there's already a potential tailwater effect now that we're going to have to look into. That's one of the next steps for the students, is figuring out, okay, can the canals handle this amount of flow when we're pumping into it? And that's something they're going to have to figure out. So yes, there's definitely going to be a potential tailwater effect that's going to influence the capacity of canals to handle any pumped water.
Are you able to learn anything to apply from other wetland areas facing these issues, like in the New Orleans area?
That's an area that we have looked to for guidance. I will say we've one of the engineers that's outside of our group that's working on this is from Louisiana and has tried to pull things from that area. And I can tell you, he's just about as stumped as we are when looking through this. So we're looking to other areas, but we haven't, I guess, found the silver bullet when looking at other areas of the kind of the perfect solution that might solve the issues that are being faced here.
How much have you considered migratory bird hunting seasons in December and January as a source of ammonium and nitrogen sources, peak hunting season in this area?
So that's something that goes back to kind of my unanswered questions here. So if I had to guess, I would say that a lot of that inorganic N is probably due to waterfowl. If you go back and look specifically at the managed wetland area, there's no fertilizer applied here. And you can see the impact that waterfowl has on the ammonium. So I do think that plays a role. The other thing that has been brought to my attention is just the potential during waterfowl, during hunting season. That's when more people are there. And it could be that the septic systems in the area really get overloaded during that time, and maybe they aren't as able to treat the waste as effectively. So yeah, waterfowl is something we're considering, but we don't have really the data to look into it well, but I think that is probably a very large source of nitrogen for the lake.
Okay, last question. How much per year would each of the pump solutions cost?
That is a great question that I do not have an answer to yet. So that's something, if you're really interested in that, you can send me an email and I can make sure you get the final report that we're going to hopefully have produced by the end of April. But I do not have an answer for that at this time. That's a great question, though.
All right, Randall, thank you so much for your time today. Everyone on the call, your PDH form and NCBEL survey will be emailed out to you shortly. Our next session is at 2 p.m., the user's guide to persuasive presentations. Thank you, everyone.